Okay, so I'm launching a series of talks. I assume they're talks, mostly, possibly other events, based on the theme of what are the centre's core values. And you may not have necessarily known that we have core values, but we do have core values, and I've got them written down here. But before I even get that far, I wanted to do a little bit of rectification of terms. I've come to the conclusion that in some ways the word centre is an unhelpful word for the centre. Yeah, and I'll tell you why. I think it can be unhelpful because obviously this is the centre. This is the sort of physical bricks and mortar property that we inhabit, and very beautiful it is too. Yeah, but I think you potentially run into difficulties if you start conflating or confusing the Sangha and the spiritual community with the centre. And a lot of things happen outside the centre, and there are people who meet away from the centre and practice community away from the centre as well. And another thing about a centre, of course, if you have a centre, sort of by definition, you have a periphery. Yeah, and I don't like to think of the spiritual community in terms of a place of sort of central focus where things get more peripheral the further out you go. So I quite like to follow Brixton's example and talk more about the community. Yeah, the community, the Sangha, this community. So that's just a little aside, something I've been thinking about for a while. Yeah, how we need to be kind of careful with the terms we use. So that's just a little aside. So in any case, the four kind of principal values of our community as formulated, well, I think this is sort of down to Sarvanti, are these: to help people go deeper in their practice and move towards awakening, to create a community based on metta and spiritual friendship, to help people express the altruistic dimension of Dharma practice, and to pass on Triratna's lineages of teachings, practices, and responsibility. Okay, so what we're going to do in this series of talks is various people are going to explore different facets or different values using some of Urgyen Sangharakshita's talks. So we're going to be basing this series on the words and the teachings of our founder very much. But I'm not going to do that, partly because I've got the brief of talking about all of them, and I couldn't possibly, do justice to what Bhante says about all of those things in any way. I'd be stealing the thunder of the people who are coming after me. So I'm going to instead indulge myself and do a little bit of a ramble around those themes, and in a way which I hope, makes reasonable sense. So I want to do a bit more rectification of terms. I can't remember where the expression rectification of terms comes from. I think it might be Confucian, or maybe some clever Buddhist teacher said the most important thing in the spiritual community is to get your concepts right, to avoid all sorts of confusion. And the term I wanted to rectify, at least for myself, is the term enlightenment. Yeah, I'm very glad that Sarvanti used the word awakening in these values. And for myself, I've increasingly felt the need to shift away from the language of enlightenment and the transcendental and the unconditioned towards awakening. So enlightenment, it suggests a state change, doesn't it? It suggests a particular state that you can reach, which is, in most of our imaginations, somewhere a long way away from where we are now. Yeah, and ideas like the transcendental with a capital T, implying things which are beyond our ken, above the world, Lokutra. They're interesting, and many people have found them useful. But I wonder how relevant and useful those sorts of terms are to us. They apply as I said, they imply kind of states or conditions that have very little to do with where we are, or where I am. I can't speak for you. Maybe you find the idea of the transcendental and enlightenment really, really inspiring, in which case it's fine, carry on using it. But what I like about awakening is that it suggests process. Yeah, awakening is a process. When you come out of sleep, you don't necessarily do it all at once. Yeah, you gradually drift back into consciousness. And I think for most of us, and I can certainly speak for me, that drift into consciousness is a very, very slow and long drawn out one. Yeah, but there's a movement. There's a kind of momentum going from where we are now to where we want to get to. So I'm much more interested in talking about this in terms of kind of awakening qualities which belong to that process. And maybe there are qualities of the awakened mind or the awakening mind that we can relate to more readily, that are more useful to us than sort of highfalutin ideas of enlightenment. Yeah. So I'm just wondering what those might be. So what kind of qualities of the awakening mind can we find useful and supportive in our own practice? Do we have a sense where, yes, I could actually do something with this, or I already have some inkling of what this feels like? So I came up with obvious things in a way, like the practice of the Brahma Viharas. If you imagine the awakened one, the Buddha, as somebody who has perfected the practice of metta, karuna, compassion, mudita, sympathetic joy, and upekkha, equanimity, that's something that maybe we can get some sort of handle on in our own very imperfect way. We can practice those things. Yeah, and we look at the awakened mind as having consummated those, then there's already a bridge, isn't there, from where we are to where we're going, or a path that we can see unfolding in front of us. So practicing those, the practice of awareness. Yeah? So the Buddha was the paragon of awareness, of mindfulness. And mindfulness is something that we can practice too as an awakening quality. And we can deepen our practice of that, progressively as we go through our spiritual lives. Well, I have to say, in my case, for instance, my mindfulness of things is, I don't think it's an iota better than it was 30 years ago before I started practicing. But maybe this is the work of many lifetimes. Yeah. Maybe there's something about flexibility of being, that, the adaptability of not being very attached to a particular idea of who you are, that allows you to be with all sorts of people and engage with them fully. Yeah, I find that the Buddha could talk to anybody. Yeah, and it's anecdotally said of Bhante Sangharakshita that he could talk to anybody. He could talk to the kind of waitress in the Happy Eater and discuss the relative merits of the Happy Eater sauce bottle as opposed to the sachets you get at the Little Chef, which he got very excited about. So there's something about the ease with which you can move from one communication situation to another, because you're not particularly attached or invested in being a particular way. So there's something about flexibility of being as an awakening quality. Yeah. What about, or perhaps even just being positive and sort of friendly when there is no obvious reason to be so? I think I've heard that, this is probably in the Abhidharma, that one of the unconditioned things is the smile of the Arahant. Yeah? An Arahant will smile when there is no possible reason for the Arahant to smile. There are no conditions in play which would cause the Arahant to smile, but the Arahant is sort of independent of conditions, and so kind of imbued and permeated with loving kindness and wisdom and compassion that smiling and being friendly is the natural response. So perhaps we could imagine awakening, our own process towards awakening as an ever greater disposition or tendency to be friendly and to sort of, use humor, and just even when there's even in situations of great stress and difficulty. Yeah. So there are all sorts of qualities. Oh, and gratitude. Gratitude is another one. Gratitude is a quality that I frequently sort of forget or I'm not sufficiently kind of versed in. But can you imagine sort of being constantly grateful? Yeah? I think gratitude is an awakening quality, because what gratitude implies is that you are aware of the conditions that come together to allow things to be possible. Yeah? Rather than just being somehow separate and feeling entitled to things to be a certain way. If you're grateful, then there's a full acknowledgement of dependent origination, of Pratitya Samutpada. Yeah? That lots and lots of conditions have conspired to produce this building, or produce an ambulance, or the food that we eat. Yeah, and just being aware of that, it puts us right into the heart of wisdom. Yeah, so these are all notes to self, by the way, as always with these talks. Yeah, so gratitude as a quality, as a quality of the awakening mind. So I think if we look at awakening in terms of qualities that we have some inkling of, and we can develop more fully, then maybe that's a a more helpful way of looking at awakening, of looking at enlightenment, rather than thinking of it as some magic mystical state change that's over there somewhere that I have no relationship with at all. Yeah. So as I said, I'm very glad that Sarvanti used the word awakening. Yeah, I think it's a much more useful and for me more evocative term to describe the process towards Bodhi. So that's something about awakening qualities. And I think Vajrapriya is going to talk about enlightenment next week. Yeah. So enlightenment is experience and non-experience. So just a little plug for next week. So yeah, so if we are cultivating awakening qualities as a spiritual community, maybe we can think of them in terms of things that we already experience or have some sense of, at least in germinal form, and just really bringing those qualities on. So I want to talk a bit about community. So when the Buddha was first awakened, after spending days staring with unblinking eyes at the Bodhi tree, out of gratitude for having sheltered him and given him shelter as he was becoming awakened, he decided to go off and teach. And in the end, he found himself with his 5 disciples, his 5 former companions from the ascetic life. So before he was enlightened, he had practiced these fearsome practices of self-mortification with these people and he was the absolute kind of bee's knees when it came to self-mortification. And he was so good at it that he had this kind of following. But in the end, he decided it wasn't the path. So he went off and left them, and they were grievously disappointed. But he thought they might listen. They might be able to hear what I've got to say. So he sought them out, and they said, here comes Gautama, who went back to the life of luxury. He can come and sit with us if he wishes, but we're not going to make any effort. We're not going to sort of, make any particular effort to welcome him. But as he drew near, they were compelled to make us to stand up, to go and greet him respectfully, and to prepare a seat for him. They were compelled, but impelled by some kind of power that the Buddha was manifesting, that he was exuding, if you like. And so almost despite themselves, they welcomed him and they sat down and listened to him. And they spent time together, and they spent days, weeks together, with the Buddha teaching them and people going off to get alms and coming back to feed the whole group. It makes me think that somebody went off to get pizza and came back, in our modern equivalent. And weeks passed, and then eventually one of them, Kondanya, saw insight, the vision, the knowledge and vision of the way things are arose in him. And the Buddha gave rise to this triumphant shout of Kondanya knows, with delight. But this was the first spiritual community. And the word that came to mind for me in relation to this was something like, it was the eruption of the Dharma into their lives, into that community. So when the Buddha first appears, it's a bit like this force erupts into their presence, into their lives, and they can't resist it. And then the Dharma arises, the awareness of the truth dawns on Kondanya. So the truth arises within him, it erupts into his being. And so the question that made me ask was, how can we have set up conditions where the Dharma erupts into our community? Yeah, where it manifests with full force, where it becomes a living and vital and vibrant experience that as many of us as possible share. Do we want that? Yeah, with all the kind of challenging and scary implications of the Dharma manifesting with all of its inconvenience and its challenging of our views and our assumptions. Yeah, we have to ask ourselves this, I think I want it. I'm not always sure. Sometimes I'd rather just have a quiet life or just arrange things so that I've got my kind of therapeutic space, if you like. So do you want that? Do you want the Dharma to erupt into your life, or are you more interested in the kind of a therapeutic space which is kind of separate and kept cloistered away from the world? Tempting, that is very tempting. Yeah. And another phrase that arose for me in this context is that we need to keep the Buddha close. Yeah? These original disciples, they had the Buddha. The Buddha was with them. He was physically present. We don't have that. Of course, we don't have that, but how can we keep the Buddha close for us? Yeah. I'd be tempted to say, well, you read the scriptures, you read biographies and all of that stuff. And I think you can do that. But I think in a heady and sort of some ways over-intellectual society like ours, that's probably not necessarily the best thing, or certainly not the only thing that you should do. I think we keep the Buddha close by being with other people who share our aspirations, yeah, who can rouse, gladden, and inspire us, and who we can rouse, gladden, and inspire. I think we can spend time with the people who inspire us. Seek out people in our lives who manifest awakening qualities, at least, well, I don't mean who are fully enlightened, fully awakened, but who, for as far as we can see, they share something of the light of the Buddha, that they have that going on in their lives, and seek them out, spend time with them. So going on retreat, finding people that inspire you. I mean, I'm going to Padmaloka soon to go on the Mitrikavina's retreat, and I'm looking forward to seeing Padmavajra, who is one of those people who really has it, who inspires me. I invariably come away from those encounters roused, gladdened, and inspired with the Dharma. So I think we all need to do this. Yeah. So find people who inspire you. Get yourselves on retreat. Go to Padmaloka if you're a man. Go to Taraloka if you're a woman. Tiratmaloka if you're in the ordination process. Adhisthana. There's lots of opportunities to go and be with people who inspire you. Even, dare I say it, seek out order members. And you might think, hold on, who does he think he is? Making some sort of claims. And I don't mean that at all. The Santra says something useful, which I haven't read yet, but I have heard in this month's edition of Shabda, which is the Order Journal. He talks about spiritual teachers having a front story and a back story. And I think he says this in relationship to Sangharakshita. So there was a point when Sangharakshita was very ill with insomnia and was very down, and his mind was kind of effectively scrambled. So in some ways, he was a bit of a wreck. And that was the front story, at that time. But then Subhuti went to see him, and, the question arose in his mind, can this man be my teacher? And at that moment, he became aware of this vast consciousness manifesting in the room. And I think that was the backstory. Now, I think if order members are practicing effectively, then there will be a front story and there will be a backstory that they somehow represent that shines through. I mean, frankly, often I think I'm a bit of a mess, right? Yeah, I think my front story can be a bit of a shambles, and I'm not making claims at all, but I think, if we're practicing diligently, then that backstory, that something will shine through. And if it isn't, then what on earth are we doing? Yeah. So if you feel that, seek us out. We're not too busy or shouldn't be disturbed or somehow, not available to you. Yeah, we are available. This is kind of what we're here for. And again, I can't emphasize too strongly that I'm not making any claims or putting myself anywhere in a hierarchy, other than to say, I hope something shines through. I hope something shines through us. Well, something shines through all of us, to varying degrees. So seek out people from whom something shines through for you of the truth. And I'm going to have to say something about Zoom. Okay. I'm really pleased that the shrine room is now considerably fuller than it has been. I think that's a very welcome development. And Zoom has been a wonderful, wonderful innovation. You know, during this difficult period, during COVID, you know, in many ways, it's been an absolute, well, a lifesaver may not be too strong a word for it. And we've kept going, and we have managed to meet online and study groups and Sangha, and that is incredibly valuable. And I'm absolutely not seeking to knock that in any way. And I'm also aware that for some members of our community, Zoom is the only viable option. And again, it's not something that we will discontinue. Yeah. So what I'm saying is heavily caveated. But I do wonder that whether for some of us, there might be a temptation just to kind of take it a bit easy, to go for convenience. Yeah? When you're at home, you can switch your computer on and you can join a Zoom meeting pretty easily in the midst of your life. So you can just sit yourself down with a cup of tea and you can have some Dharma input, and that's great. That's really, really good. You can also turn your camera off and quickly check your emails or Facebook. And this has been known. I think I've been known to do this myself. Yeah. So you find yourself, you kind of take yourself out of the kind of Sangha, ritual Sangha context by doing that. And I don't think there's any real substitute for Dharma farers being together, if they can be. Yeah. Again, distance and circumstances make that difficult for some people, and which I'm fully aware of. And of course, we will always do our utmost to make sure that everyone is included. But I would just encourage you to ask, if you're on Zoom, and if you generally come in on Zoom, could I be at the center? Or are there objective reasons for me not to be there? Or has a certain amount of convenience crept into my relationship? So, just a little, I suppose I'm throwing down a very kind of a bit of a gauntlet in a way. It's all, I've been there as well. It's much easier just to go to the bottom of the garden where my kuti is and turn the computer on. I looked at, if you're worried about COVID, I'm also aware it's a factor. I looked up some stats about COVID from the Office of National Statistics. So in August, the death rate from COVID was 45.7 per 100,000 people, which isn't many. And of those 45.7, I think probably 90% of them were not vaccinated, which takes down the death toll from COVID for people who were protected to about 5 in 100,000. Yeah. So I suppose the point I'm making is that COVID, while it's an unpleasant disease, and I've had it myself, and you don't want to wish it on anybody, it's reasonably unlikely to kill you. Yeah. So I'll just leave you with that thought. And there are other things we can do. Well, I'd rather jump the gun there. Oh, there's a whole bunch of good stuff I missed out. Yeah. Going on retreat, meditating. If you've asked for ordination, do the prostration practice. Yeah. If you've been introduced to the going for refuge and prostration practice as a way of keeping the Buddha close, the Buddha and all of the figures in the Buddhist pantheon. Yeah. It's a wonderful way of really engaging with the Buddha at a sort of emotional and bodily way, if you like. Yeah. Or just reflect on the Buddha's qualities in the practice of Buddhanusati, which is reflecting, becoming aware of the Buddha's qualities. Find a Buddha image you like, a Buddha rupa you like, and sit with it. Yeah. Invite it into your heart. Yeah. Okay, good. So that's some stuff about community. Yeah. I suppose there's one more thing I wanted to say about community, that where people come together, there's also a place for encouragement and challenge. Yeah. So one of the quality about the Sangha, the spiritual community value mentions harmony. Harmony is really important, but harmony is not to be confused with a kind of superficial neatness or niceness that keeps conflict kind of at bay. Yeah. Sometimes when you're going deeper together, I think difficulties can arise, conflicts can arise, and then it's good to really approach those in the spirit of metta. Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes people have blind spots, and you can point them out in a kindly way, but one can be quite firm. Sometimes disagreements arise and they can be dealt with in the spirit of collegiality, in the spirit of metta. And I'd just like to kind of sing the praises of the what I hear, at least, that goes on in the men's Going for Refuge group, that communication quite quickly becomes quite sort of edgy, but that's done in a kind of real spirit of kind of wanting to kind of go deeper. And I'm sure there are many, many contexts within our community of which the same could be said. Yeah, but that's the one that I've heard of most recently. Yeah. So let's be prepared to go deeper. Let's be prepared to bump up against one another. And this is something I'm pretty terrible at, I have to say. So, it's something I really need to practice too. Okay, so back to the Buddha and his 5 disciples. So sometime later, people have become arahants, people have become awakened. Apparently it was much easier back in the day when you were with the Buddha. So I think at some point, some time later, there were dozens of awakened beings in the world. And the Buddha sent them out to teach. And he was very insistent that they would learn the Dharma in their own languages, so that it didn't get kind of translated into Sanskrit, so that Sanskrit would then be the preserve of some priestly caste, and then the Dharma wouldn't be available in the vernacular to anybody else. He was very keen that that didn't happen. One thinks of the Roman Catholic Church and the Latin Mass and the fact that it was the priests who were the holder of the teachings. But the Buddha didn't want that. He wanted the Dharma to be communicated to people in their own languages. So for us, that's sort of not really quite the issue, because we're not really in a situation where we have to communicate in lots of different languages. But what I take that to mean is that we all have particular gifts. Yeah? We have a particular language, if you like, in as much as we're all different people with different strengths, with different things that we can contribute to spreading the Dharma, to spreading the values that we hold most dear. Yeah. So what are your gifts? How do you share what is of most value to you? Yeah. I mean, for me, one of the things that I might do, and this is a bit contentious possibly, is sit in meditation outside a bank whose policies are in the process of destroying our world. I might choose to do that. That might be one of my gifts. Yeah. Not everyone will have to or want to do that, of course. Other people's gifts might be simply being helpful and friendly, helping out in the neighborhood, I don't know, taking on a project, working in a food bank, visiting somebody, or just being super friendly and smiling at strangers. Yeah. Or somebody's gift might be working in some other sector of welfare, for beings human and non-human. Yeah. Or it might actually be going out and helping teach the Dharma or supporting classes. It might be cleaning this center to make it a beautiful and welcoming place for people to come. There are many, many, many ways in which we can apply and deploy our particular gifts. So what are your gifts? And lastly, the last of the 4 points was about lineage. So I think it's important to recognize that we have a lineage. We are a young movement, but we do have a lineage. So our lineage goes back through our founder, Sangharakshita, who ordained Jayaratna was ordained directly by Sangharakshita. But for the rest of us, were ordained by people who were ordained by Sangharakshita, or ordained by people who were ordained by people who were ordained by Sangharakshita. Yeah. So down through the order, this lineage comes down from Bhante Sangharakshita. And of course, the lineage goes the other way through his own teachers in various traditions, you know, in early Buddhism, in the Theravada, and various traditions of Tibetan Buddhism, and even the Chinese lineages. So in some ways, a lot of threads of lineage came together in Sangharakshita. And those lineages, those threads ultimately all lead back to the Buddha. Yeah. So we do have a lineage.
It's behind you.
Sorry?
It's behind you.
The lineage. Yes, there it is. The refuge tree. Thank you. So all of those figures of uplift and inspiration who are part of our collective lineage as a spiritual tradition, as a Buddhist tradition. Okay. But I think it's quite important, it was useful, perhaps even important to know that lineage, to be familiar with it, because in a way, the lineage is like the medium that we move in. It's a bit like a goldfish swimming in water doesn't realize it's in water because it's just its natural medium, as it were. And I think for myself, as Triratna is that for me, it's that sort of medium that I move in. In a way, it's like when you move in a medium, it's quite hard to stop noticing it. Yeah, it's quite easy to stop noticing it. That's what I meant. It's quite easy to start taking things for granted. It's quite easy to pick fault. It's quite easy to fall out with people, to find reasons for discord. Whereas if I stop and think more deeply and more carefully about what we have, then, you know, we do have some incredible teachings. We have some very distinctive emphases and practices which I think are really useful in people's lives. You know, the centrality of going for refuge, which is something that unifies all of us here. Yeah. So the emphasis on spiritual friendship, for instance. Yeah, and a unified order that anyone can join. Yeah, it's not closed to anyone, of any gender or ethnic group or political persuasion or anything. So there's a wonderful kind of sense of openness and inclusivity in our order, and all sorts of other things. So I think that's worth preserving, and I think those things are worth investigating and becoming familiar with. Yeah. It doesn't mean only read Sangharakshita. Yeah. It doesn't mean just, you know, never turn to any other teacher for inspiration, but I think it's important for us to be sort of appreciative of what has contributed, what makes up the medium through which we move. Okay, good. So that's all I wanted to say.